the state of college football, recruiting in the NIL. Is there more parity in the sport? And do you believe that the product, as a result of the chaos in the shadows, is better?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any thoughts as you go through what you saw yesterday? And if you don't, I'll start and I'll light the fire.
Here's my question. When you say, is the product better, are you talking about the on-field, between the white lines, what we see every Saturday? Or are you talking about sort of the binary question of, are you more interested in the sport today than you were 1 year ago?
I guess you could probably do the second thing you said.
Okay.
In terms of good games, good system, generally interested in your players and your team all year round. And do you feel more connected or bought into your program, your team, and the sport on a holistic level with all these new rules and circumstances than you did maybe 5 years ago?
I think it's complicated. I think on the field, in terms of we're going to have more equality, more parity, I'm not sure we've seen that. You could point to Washington, you can point to TCU, you could point to, I guess, Cincinnati, but I don't think that those are necessarily, I think those are just sort of coincidences and perfect storms rather than trend lines. I think it's going to be harder to build a super team, but as far as just college football as a more equal sport, it's just never going to be that way because of the way roster construction is made. The rich are always going to get richer. Now, what I think the portal and NIL have done is two things: two good, one bad. The first good, hope is very powerful. You're always one transfer away. Oh, our quarterback sucks. Well, we can just go get a quarterback in the portal next year. That's kind of a powerful thing in terms of helping interest in the sport. If your team was terrible 5 years ago, you'd hire a new coach. You say, well, we're 2-3 years away. Now you feel like, like Washington's a great example. They were awful in the last year of Jimmy Lake. And now they're in the playoff because they got a new coach and they added a quarterback and they got a couple guys out of the portal and they got a more competent system and they flipped it really fast. USC is sort of a lesser example in some ways, but like they went from being not very good to pretty good, pretty fast. You can do that now. That's a powerful thing. However, and I will say the other good thing with that is that college football is becoming more of a year-round talking point. Roster construction and guys going in the portal has extended the time in which people are talking about the sport. That's probably good for the sport. Now, I think the transient nature of the rosters as a whole now probably does hurt the sport among a lot of casual fans. Your diehards, they're always going to be there. They're always going to be looking for the next move. I hope we do this. Are we going to do this? Are we talking to this guy? But when everybody's moving around in crazy ways like we're seeing now, I think you see a lot of casual people sort of just hit their college football switch, kind of like turn it off, and then say, I'm checking back in August. Let me know who's on what team.
Yeah.
I think you'll see some of that. So I think slightly better. I don't think it's like in a whole new world. I don't think it's like headed for disaster. I think it's a lot of conflicting factors that have made it in a slightly better position than 5 years ago.
Okay, so there seems to be this notion, and I've seen columns and graphics floating around Twitter about this discussion. In the 247 Sport Composite, the top 10 players nationally, obviously all 5-star prospects, this year went to 9 different schools. Mm-hmm. Only one team signed more than one top 10 players nationally, which means that there are more teams that are getting a piece of the most elite level players pie. I'm talking about Mizzou getting one, and Auburn getting one, Nebraska getting one, and Texas Tech getting one. And there seems to be this notion that because of NIL and because of these new opportunities, that there is going to be more parity in the sport because these programs and teams are getting players that they never would have been able to get to in the past. And I think that especially if you look at like Texas Tech's player and Nebraska's player and Mizzou's player, they're all either from the area or have ties to sell the home situation, which I think is still a pretty good thing for the NIL in the way that it was supposed to be used. But when you peel back the curtain a little bit, Mitch Light and I are going to do a data-driven piece about this at some point in the next week or so. I went back and looked. about parity and whether or not that's actually a thing. And I have conflicting results, and I want to know what your thought is.
Mm-hmm.
In the 2021 class, which was the last full class before NIL got instituted, 23 different teams signed at least one top 100 player. Okay. In the 2024 cycle with NIL, how many different teams do you think signed at least one top 100 player?
Is
If
it
you had
30?
to guess.
Is it 30?
No, it's 25. There's very to little difference at all in that category. So the people who are at the table are still at the table. Now, there might be a few new ones who have one or two, but for the most part, it's the same usual suspects signing the bulk of these players than they were in the past. So that to me makes it feel like, well, it's really not that different, even if we're trying to trick ourselves that it is. But then here's where things are different, Dave. In the 2021 cycle, Ohio State and Alabama combined for 30 top 100 players. So 30% of the most elite level players in the country went to two schools in that cycle pre-NIL.
Mm-hmm.
In this cycle, the programs that signed the most top 100 players, Georgia, Alabama, Miami, and Ohio State combined for 33. So that's 4. So even though there aren't as many new teams sitting at the table, I think that the amount on everybody's plate is starting to be similar. You might be at the table in Alabama and Ohio State's in the last few years, and Georgia's had like food running off the side of it because it was so much. And now there's more equitable plates at the table, which then I think would lead to more parity amongst the teams that were already like super team lights. Does that make sense? Now I want to go and I want to look the last 3 years combined and then the next 3 and do a more deeper statistical analysis of this. But I do think it is interesting that only one team this year, and that was Georgia, signed 10 double-digit top 100 players in their single class. And that was Georgia when they flipped KJ Bolden. They got back to 10 after losing to Dylan Raiola to Nebraska. So here is my question, and the thing that I want to write a column about eventually. Yesterday's signing day was not fun for me. I didn't like it. I usually love signing day, and I love the grab ass of it, and I love, who's going to do what or when. But I cannot stand the notion that these guys are just being brokered by adults while they sit there waiting to hear where they're going. And that's somebody who enjoys the notion that they should be paid and thinks they should be compensated.
Mm-hmm.
But there is, when we talk about the product and we talk about whether or not it's better, Dave, for the fan, there used to be this inherent connection to the high school players that pick your teams, who, for the most part, were going to come to your school. You were going to get to know those players. They were going to stick through your school for 4 years or 3 years or 4 to 5 since their commitment. You are going to watch them grow within your university. The connection to you and where you went to college is stronger because you feel like you guys went to the same place.
Yeah.
And there was a connection to that. If a player on National Signing Day used to pick your school, whether he got fed money under the table or not, there used to be this notion that he is one of us or one of me.
Yes.
That is gone.
It was
like that.
It was easier to, I think what you're alluding to is it was easier to shrug off the pejorative you're cheering for laundry. And when the rosters are as transient as they are now, it feels a lot more like
you don't even know who the players are. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that people don't root for a 1-year rental at quarterback or they won't root for whoever's wearing their uniforms. What I'm saying is if you think that the experience as a fan is better for the average fan, I think in that regard, it's gotten a lot worse. Now, that doesn't mean that the playoff won't be fun or that teams won't get better or that there might be more parity. I still think we have to see whether or not this year's playoff is an indication of what's to come or if it was kind of a weird year. But you're not connected to the players the way that you used to be. If you don't know who's your starting quarterback, you think it might be Hope. Okay, that's Hope. But it also is like, you don't know who's going to be your starting quarterback next year. It's like Ohio State. We were talking about their quarterback a few minutes ago. Could be anybody. We don't know who it's going to be.
Also, I think it's important to note also, Ari, and I think we're in agreement on this. The players aren't the ones to blame here. It's all the administrators and all the commissioners who have been so resistant to change, and you have legislated yourself into a corner now where both your hands are tied behind your back and you can't stop any of the roster movement because you didn't want to share any revenue. You wanted to pretend like you were a nonprofit, pretend that these guys that were helping you fund billion-dollar TV deals were not employees, that they were student athletes and embracing amateurism, despite the fact that you went from, I'd be curious, the budgets in like 1996 versus the budgets in 2023. I mean, it's like thousands of percent higher, I'm guessing.
Sure.
Close to that. And the athletes haven't seen any of this, and you didn't want to share any of that. And now you've tried to explain this business model to the courts, and the courts are saying, that's insane. You have no right to do anything with these athletes. Restrict them. You're unpaid, and now you're not allowed to give them a 1-year non-compete, which is what it actually is, not a quote-unquote year in residency, which is the dumbest term maybe in college sports. So you're not allowed to restrict their movement. The waivers are going away. You're probably going to have open transfers until you get something close to a more sustainable model. And that little negative that is hurting college football is because you were so resistant to playing ball and having a real conversation about something that is fair and equitable for both sides. But hey, they got barbershops in the facility and slides and recording studios and all this
Waterfalls.
stuff. And yes, and water. Well, now I will say I talked to Greg Byrne in Vegas, and he was on a panel, and he noted that with little fanfare, Alabama actually did away with the waterfall a few years ago, and nobody noticed. I didn't know that, honestly. So shout out to Alabama for getting rid of the waterfall. But the thing
about this
to illustrate the point
is that regardless of whose fault it is, the people who are paying the brunt of the experience are the people who are watching it, and the people who are paying the brunt of how it's going and with the players are the players based on trying to maximize their value whenever they can based on where they are in the. But my thought process here is because it is complete chaos. It's nonsense. Every single time a player we're waiting on their national letter of intent. We're wondering if they're brokering a deal behind the scenes. Every single time a school loses out on a player, it's because the other team paid more, or
which is fine.
Whatever it is. But the question that I have to you is, if the data shows in the next few years that parity is a result of this, that more teams are getting better players, and as a result of it, you're going to have playoffs with Michigan and Washington and 4 teams that are all plus money going into it instead of having one superpower that cannot be beaten. If the cost of getting to that place, which is the graceland for everybody who wants there to be parity in college football, if the chaos and the month of December and the weirdness that happens in recruiting is worth the price of that to you.
I don't think so, because Ari, I think this again, it points to a philosophical difference between the two of us and how we view the sport. You say you don't view it like this, but I think you actually do. And that is, I think most fans, because you have to if you're a fan of, Purdue, or you're a fan of Washington State, or you're a fan of whatever. The national championship is sort of secondary. That doesn't define my experience of the sport. It doesn't the thing that I wake up and think about. It'd be awesome if my team could get there, so-and-so, but I think most fans don't see it that way. It's about that connection. It's about that sense of home. It's about, hey, I had this great experience here, or I grew up here, or I've cheered for this team my whole life, and these kids are I'm sort of living vicariously through them. They have a connection to my campus. This is why college football is so different than pros in a lot of ways. And I think when you lose that, I think you lose a lot of the soul of the sport. So the fact that more teams will be competing for a national title, if that's even the case, which I'm not even sure it is, maybe it is. We'll see as time bears that out. Maybe, but I think you're losing what is more meaningful for a lot higher percentage of fans in the sport. So I would not say that it's worth it. No.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. And I don't know, you say I don't think through the national championship lens. I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the entire point of games, to find out who won.
I mean, but it's not. It is, but it's not college football, Ari. It's just not. I care about the national championship. That's probably the thing that I care about. That's like the fifth thing I care about.
Do you want to know a true story about me, Dave?
I'm scared to hear this, but yes.
No, it's about college football and my
Okay.
experience
Okay.
early on as a young reporter. I was a student reporter at the University of Arizona, and either my last or second to last year, Arizona made the Las Vegas Bowl. And Arizona made this Las Vegas Bowl. Everybody in Tucson was excited. Everyone was like, holy crap, Mike Stoops has got this thing going. It's our first bowl game in X number of years. I can't remember what the circumstances were, but I remember thinking as a young reporter then, with no exposure to anything else, but just like covering the team for the newspaper as a kid. I was like 18 years old and didn't understand anything about anything.
Yes.
Why are people so happy? This is a disaster. Like, I used to think to myself, like, they lost 7 times or 6 times this year. Like, why are we celebrating this? Like, it's some sort of accomplishment. And like, I went to the Las Vegas Bowl, and Tucson and Arizona fans were so happy. And I remember sitting up in the press box in the Vegas Bowl thinking, like, these people think they're at the Super Bowl right now. This is a joke.
It's not a joke, Ari. It's college football.
So maybe it has always been
definitely
inherently in my chest. I was
anyone
like,
who's listened to this show would know that. Listen,
but then I guess if you're born and indoctrinated into a program that just has not been very good, you kind of just accept that you have to view the sport through the parameters in which your team lives in. You can't think about national championships if you went to Colorado State. Like, that's not your fault, but that doesn't mean that you still shouldn't strive to win your conference or to win 10 games or to do things that you can celebrate in your own right. But I think that there is a lot of celebrated mediocrity in college football, and I don't know that that's my cup of tea, but I certainly understand why people do.
Some call it celebrated mediocrity. Some people call it embracing realistic expectations. Hey,
yeah,
tomato.
I mean, I think that everybody, for how much money is being paid to these coaches, and I just think that striving for excellence is the entire lesson of the sport, and I think that doing that is the point of the game. Like, I think that's the whole thing.
Or you have to define excellence in a fair way. The way that rosters are constructed, it is not reasonable. Like, at the end of the day, Ari, this is all supposed to be fun. Okay? And what is the fun of, if you're an Arizona fan, to use your example, and the only thing that will satisfy you is winning the Pac-12 or winning the national championship? Then you've literally never had a fun year of college football ever, and you're not going to be a college football fan because you're like, this experience is miserable. My team went 9-3, and I'm ready to like.
Well, that's different. No, I think like they could celebrate this year. This is a great year for them. But I'm talking about in
general, though. That's what I'm saying, though. And like, you could say it's mediocrity because they didn't get to the Georgia level, but like, you have to be realistic.
But I didn't mean it that they have to get to the Georgia level. I think that this is a great year to celebrate. This was a transcendent year for Arizona football. Now, I don't know if that will ever mean going to play against Georgia in the college football playoff, but I also do believe that in the 12-team era, that teams like Arizona, maybe as soon as next year, might be making the playoff and might be able to win a game. And honestly speaking, with how good that they became at the end of the year, I'd love to see them play Oregon or Washington. They were a very good football team this year. And just because they stunk forever doesn't mean that they didn't pull the right strings. They got a coach that understands how recruiting works and got a top 50 receiver out of California and a really good quarterback. And guess what? They're good. Like, I just don't know that it is as impossible to win at places as people think it is. It might be as impossible to win a national championship. But, it is just an interesting dynamic because as I sat through, Dave, National Signing Day on Wednesday, I just thought this is a meat market, and I don't know who's having fun right now. Like, I was kind of sad about that.
That part of it is uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, kids are getting paid. I hope they go to places and have the wherewithal within them.
What if they're going to places they don't want to go to as a result of getting paid?
I hope that's not the case. And I think for some kids it was, but I don't think for everyone. I think for me, the thing, I didn't particularly enjoy this signing day because it felt inconsequential in the portal era. That's my biggest takeaway from yesterday, is you see all these decisions, and in 2015, this is going to change the course of a lot of programs' future. In 2023, that kid, like half the kids that are in the top 100 might be in the portal.
I think that's right. I'm not going to go down the road with you of like it was inconsequential. If you're a team that signed multiple top 100 players and you get to foster your program's foundation with those players, you're going to be more better off.
How about this? Sorry, how about instead of inconsequential, how about a fraction of the consequence of a decade ago? How about that?
I don't know.
Small fraction.
I mean, we'll see.